This is the card text. This is episode 14, where we continue with our card talk format, in which we each pick 3 cards from the recently announced Marvel Champions release and give our thoughts on them. This episode will be discussing the Spider-Ham Hero Pack. Spider-Ham comes with the Justice Aspect and the Inheritor Modular Set. So, starting out, who wants to go first? That's the important question.
I can go first. That's fine. All right. So, card I picked was the Spider-Ham Identity itself. So he's a 2 thwart, 1 attack, 1 defense hero. Each tune counter on Spider-Ham can be spent as if it were a wild resource. And he has a response after Spider-Ham takes any amount of damage. Place 1 tune counter on him. 12 hit points with a 5 hand size. So, the whole take damage, get resources idea just seems very interesting to me. It's the part that makes me most excited for the hero. I mean, there's all of the parts of it that as my son was reading the cards, that he was very excited about all the actions and things that you get to do interacting with the game, which I think can be fun times too. But the main thing that just kind of fires my juices going for in terms of how is this going to be an interesting hero to interact with and stuff comes down to that whole take damage, get resources for it. How can you turn this into a working scenario for the hero to be able to build up those counters? A lot of his cards also spend counters, so it seems like a very it's kind of like the opposite of Groot, where damage takes away the counters that you want to make. This one's damage builds up the counters that lets you do more stuff.
Take damage. So cards like Battle Fury, right, is a player card that's going to give you damage. That's in aggression. I believe it's after you attack and defeat a minion, discard Battle Fury, you take a damage, and it'll ready you.
Which, combined with his good thwart, seems like a nice combination. I mean, you'll have to use something else to deal with the minion, but...
And so the other cards I'm thinking of, Toe to Toe, which makes the villain attack you, which might not be so bad when he's sitting at 12 hit points there. And that's also an aggression. And the other card, which I'm really interested in trying in him, and I know it's not a very popular card, but Great Responsibility, I think would be interesting to have in him, just because at the top of the villain phase, you always get that one threat, and creating a card for a resource, I don't know, maybe that's not worth it.
Well, I mean, it's free at that point, right? Because you get a resource out of it. It's a free threat stop. I mean, it still costs damage, but it's resource neutral.
Right, so it's like banking it for later. But that's the card I'm most interested in having in him, even if it's going to cost you more than 1 damage. Scott, do you have anything else to add on the Spider-Ham hero identity?
It's an interesting twist on Drax as well. Obviously he triggers off attacks and has a limit on the number of counters he can get, and then he gets stronger. And Spider-Ham is getting stronger in a different way. He's getting resources rather than an 80k boost. But I really like this character as well for that. It presents an interesting, not challenge for deck building, but something you can build a deck around that is different to the way other heroes work. It's really nice.
I think generally a hero that can gain a lot of resources, assuming Spider-Ham will get them fairly easily, those heroes tend to want to play a lot of allies. So what if it doesn't go straight into like some sort of leadership build where you're playing a bunch of allies with all these resources that he has? Like, what other player cards do you think he'll want to play from aspects? Like just expensive attacks maybe that are kind of...
The usual leadership builds, certainly for me, is I'm using allies to block, which you're not going to want to do with Spider Hammer because you want to be taking the damage. So yeah, it's going to change the way that if you go with the leadership build, it's going to change the way you actually use your allies, and I think that will be the case for all aspects. Yeah, I can't think of any other cards that you haven't mentioned I particularly want to try with him.
I think he'll appreciate having allies available.
Yes.
You want to take damage, you have to be a little bit careful because of the surprise assault or extra villain attack. Then you're too low in hit points to take. So you're going to need to have your allies out there to block for you. You just might not want to use them proactively blocking. You're going to use them kind of secondary.
Actually, that has made me think of one thing. What's the card from Thor's pack that gets you a minion?
Get over here.
Yeah. Because, yeah, what you might want to do is use your allies to block the bigger villain attack and just take small hits to just keep your toon counter supply refreshed from the minions. And you may even want to be keeping minions around for that reason.
So just pulling the minions out, yeah. But I think that gets into one of those other cards, because I think you need Ariel to make that card pull, right?
All right. Were you thinking of looking for trouble? The search for one and remove 3 threat?
That wasn't the one I was thinking of, but yeah, I had forgotten that you need Ariel for Get Over Here.
Do you think looking for trouble would be a nice substitute if you didn't go that route?
Yes, definitely. Oh yeah, anything that gets you minions.
Moving on to the next card then. If it's alright, I'd like to go next. And I think this is the first time we're kind of overlapping here, because I was going to pick Spider-Ham Hero as well, and then I was going to cheat and say, the whole identity. But in this case, I'm just going to go with the Alter Ego. The Alter Ego is Peter Porker, 5 recovery, cartoon and civilian trait. And he's got the ability, cartoon power, response. After you make a basic recovery, place 1 toon counter on Peter Porker. He's got the flavor text. You ever feel as if someone else is in control, like you're just a character in the game? And hand size 6 and hit points 12. As I kind of, I guess, alluded to earlier, the counters that he can get on his hero side from all that damage, from using cards like maybe Great Responsibility and other cards that deal in damage, is going to be kind of inconsequential if he could just because he could just flip and heal whatever damage he occurs. He's got so yeah, his high recovery I think makes up for the fact that he wants to take all this damage. And a quick yes or no, if I can get it from you guys. Do we think he could just heal right off the bat, turn 1, without worrying about whether he has damage?
I think so.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Without getting too into the weeds with it. So that'll give you 1 right at the start, and then flipping, you're obviously going to take damage in the villain phase. That's a couple more right there, and then whatever player cards you have to maximize that. So I think he'd be sitting pretty good after 1 or 2 rounds. And again, yes, the high thwart I think will help, and he's in the justice aspect, so I expect him to be able to handle whatever threat might accumulate from him going to his alter ego side. The other thing important to remember, you don't lose the counters. So unlike say Drax, who does lose his counters when you flip, you just keep them there. Any other thoughts on Peter Porker?
The one thing that jumped out to me when I first saw him was he's a civilian. We've got another civilian.
Yes. Everyday hero resource card that gives you can spend it on anyone, and then whoever you spend it on, it heals them 1 if you have the civilian trait. Oh yeah, and it's more healing for him if he spends it on himself.
So he likes to be an everyday cartoon pig hero.
Exactly. Just your average friendly neighborhood Spider-Ham. So what were you going to say, Thero, as well, about...
I was just going to say that I think, as you were saying, I think the Justice Precon will help with the idea of going Alter Ego to recover, to make up for the damage that's maybe why he's in the Justice to start with, and it'll make one of the things that he'll really like about Justice. We talked a lot about aggression cards that he'll like because aggression has a lot of those kind of determination style cards. Of you take some damage to do an effect, or pull out minions that'll damage you, or be able to deal with the minions that you've pulled out. So there's a lot of kind of overlap there too.
So we'll move on to Scott's card. Scott?
Yeah. Well, seeing as you cheated, I'm going to cheat as well.
Oh, whoa, technically I didn't cheat.
I only planned on it.
Go ahead, Scott.
So I'm going to pick 2 cards again because I like picking 2 cards. And I'm going to go with the two cost upgrades: organic webbing and huge wooden hammer. I'll read organic webbing first. So as I said, 2 cost upgrade. Cartoon and superpower traded. Spider-Ham gets +1 thwart. And hero action: exhaust organic webbing and remove 1 toon counter from Spider-Ham. And then cost arrow: ready Spider-Ham. He gains the aerial trait until the end of the phase. And then the huge wooden hammer, again 2 cost upgrade. Cartoon and weapon traded. Spider-Ham gets +1 attack. And then hero interrupt: when Spider-Ham makes a basic attack, exhaust huge wooden hammer and remove 1 toon counter from Spider-Ham. Cost arrow: Spider-Ham gets +2 attack for that attack. That attack gains overkill. And the reason I wanted to pick both of these together is that whilst they are clearly related in that they're very similar things, they both give you a stat boost. They're both 2 cost upgrades. The abilities on them are quite different, and I think we've seen with characters in the past, heroes in the past, where they've done this kind of thing where you're getting 2 cards that do very similar things, and they're almost carbon copies of each other, apart from 1 or 2 things being different. Whereas these are very different. One is an interrupt, one's an action. Although the costs are basically the same. Although even there is difference in how they work. The effects are then very different. And I'm expecting we will get a defense one. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what that one does. Other than giving you +1 defense. So yeah, I tend to pick cards because of the way they're designed, and I really like the design thinking behind these 2.
And interesting that one, say, organic webbing is a superpower, and the other one's just a weapon. But yeah, that plays into the line that we had going about his thwart being pretty powerful. So this means he's going to have like a native of 3 thwart if you get this out early. And getting aerial, it's going to give him access to the aerial justice card, whose name I'm also blanking on.
Agile flight.
Yes, I believe it's agile flight. So that's a powerful card. You should have the resources, plenty of resources to pay for it.
I mean, I think the impressive thing is he'll have, once he gets that card down, he has 3 thwart and a ready for 1.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, right? For not for costing 1, but literally just 1 resource. As long as he has the toon counters available.
I guess the limit there is that as soon as you exhaust the organic webbing, you can't ready it again, as far as we know.
So one ready per turn, but still, thwart with one ready per turn is pretty good.
Yeah, one ready with aerial. Hopefully we'll see a bit more aerial tech in the pack as well.
Possible. Never say never. What was I going to say? So it always comes back to Iron Man every time we talk about ready and thwart. So it's a little bit better than the reactor that he has to ready himself, because the reactor doesn't give you thwart, but you can ready. And this organic weapon does give you the thwart, and it gives you aerial. Kind of like that. So some competition there for that card, or against that card.
It gives you the thwart and the ready and the aerial. It's like the boots and the chest and a heroic intuition all bundled up into one card.
Tony Stark is doing something wrong.
He's in a cartoon.
Exactly. That's what he's doing wrong. And the hammer. I just like the hammer thematically, because he's a cartoon. He should have a big wood mallet hammer thing.
It's not restricted, so you can double hand cannon and have a hammer.
And that plus 2 attack with overkill is nice.
That's very nice. It's gonna possibly play into some moment of triumph builds. It can also help you with your wanting of damage for the tune counters. So then we'll go to our typical rules notes. So the first card was just the hero.
I do think the constant ability on the hero is interesting from a rules perspective, just in terms of, counters can be spent as if they were a wild resource is such a not well-defined rule, like from the actual things that are defined in the rules. It's just like I know how it works. It's pretty obvious, but it's just there's no those words are defined.
I think it's intuitive. Like I would just remove the counter when I spend it, but yeah, there's no definition for spend, so I don't know to the letter what it actually means, but I would just remove the counter if I use it as a resource.
It's not a resource ability. It's not generating resources.
Mm-hmm. It's as if. Oh goodness, as if, and all the implications that comes with. But I guess that's the main question. How do you work with those counters? And I personally would just remove the counter as I'm spending it, as I would discard a card, except it doesn't go in your discard pile. Just put it back in your pool.
Presumably, it's not available for things that say discard a wild resource.
Yeah, I would say I would agree with that. Unless we have anything else to say about that, we can move to Torpedo Porker.
So, as you mentioned, the whole being able to recover even when you don't have any damage is a thing you can do because of the whole you don't have to change game states with basic abilities.
And there is technically a target. It would be your identity, I suppose.
I mean, I don't think recovery requires a target. I think it's just always.
Okay. So that's very advantageous. You could always start turn one with at least one counter. And the final card would have been the hammer and organic webbing. Yeah. Anything that jumps out there?
Not especially. I think there is one of those questions that comes up every now and again about multi-sentence abilities that have costs in them, and is all of the multi-sentence ability dependent on you paying the cost, or can you do the later sentences, which we've never had a ruling on and isn't completely clear from the RRG, but it kind of makes sense that yes, you have to pay the cost to do any of the ability. Yeah, it's kind of implied in the section about cost arrow, but it's not clear.
And it feels natural for both of these cards, so it's like, oh yeah, sure. You wouldn't expect to get either of those effects absent the cost. I think there are other situations where it feels less natural, and those are the ones that start to draw question marks.
All right, and So what else is in your list of notes there? What is in your list of notes now that we've covered all these?
And one of the things that I think Theo maybe briefly touched on, but we haven't really mentioned, is the thematic costs and effects on some of his kit cards, and how those work. For example, Hogwashed, which is one cost events, hero action, remove one toon counter from Spider Ham, cost arrow, loudly read this card's flavor text, choose to either deal 5 damage to a minion or remove 5 threat from a side scheme. And I mean, there's the obvious question of, do you actually have to read the flavor text?
You don't actually have to read it, right? Because it's after the cost era.
Well, it's not optional though.
No, it's not optional. Yeah, it's you do have to, but if you can't, then you don't have to. So, and there's also the question of, what do they mean by loudly? And is that different in the States than in the UK? Because it's my experience that Americans are generally louder than British people.
Yeah. So you guys over there in the UK are gonna have to be much louder.
If you're in an environment where you can't do it, in the library you're not allowed to, right? So that's a place where it's okay to skip it.
Exactly.
The whole once the game effects are kind of have left the rules of the game, the definition of what you can and cannot do, it's a little murkier.
Well, I mean, like practically, you could just say you don't have to do it if you don't want to. And if you're one of those people, and I know this is like a big concern for people who saw the hero and were kind of put off by it a little bit, Spider Ham, that some of the people that might be a little more obnoxious when they play, it gives them the liberty to be that much more obnoxious. But I think if you're playing with obnoxious people, you should probably not play with them.
It's the kind of thing that I would expect in actual gameplay for me. I would probably do it like once or twice and then just not again, because the time you're doing 3 or 4 things on your turn, in late game, you just trying to get through stuff quickly, damage and throw out the cancel and all that stuff without necessarily having to go through everything.
One thing that I just thought of with organic webbing and huge wooden hammer, they have "and" in their cost. And I can see that coming up as a question, because if you look up "and" in the RRG, it does talk about effects rather than costs, but it implies that both sides of the "and" are simultaneous, and as long as you do one side, it's enough for that thing to have happened. But I think when you've got an "and" in a cost, I think you do have to do both parts, and I think it's another one of those cases where they're using plain English terms that have game rule effects, but they're not using them in the game rule effect sense. They're using them in the plain English sense. Yeah, like the way they occasionally use "then" to be a sequence rather than what's the word? Can't think what the word is. One thing's dependent on the other.
And like you said, it is the cost and not the effect, so it likely doesn't apply, but it's not. It could be confusing if you get it confused with the rule.
Yeah. I mean, people often in questions, they seem to be confusing or not fully understanding the difference between a cost and an effect in an ability, because that isn't. I mean, it is kind of described in the RRG, but it isn't really clearly laid out. So yeah, it's an understandable misunderstanding.
It's definitely a situation that it's just looking at what it says in the rules. The individual effects by "and" are not dependent on each other. As long as at least one of the effects can change the game state, resolve as much of the ability as possible. So yeah, I can definitely see room for confusion from that. Just well, one of them changed the game state, so couldn't do the other one, but that's okay. I feel like probably it's one of those situations where most people would read it and be like, yeah, obviously we have to do both these things. But somebody who's looking for a way to get that edge, and they read it, reading through the rules, as people do at times, might come across the end and be like, wait a second, does this mean I can do this?
Is there another card, another event? You said you wanted to talk about costs, and these, I guess the flavor effects here that accentuate the cartooniness of Spider-Ham.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of silly questions about several of them. Let's go with Captain AMERICAT. I won't go through all of the details. He's an ally and has a response to Captain AMERICAT. Enters play, give someone a high five. Now, my main question there is, how is someone interpreted in the context of that ability? Am I a someone? Is my identity a someone? Can I high five an ally?
It sounds like you have to do a lot of inner reflection in order to answer that and use this card. Am I really someone? Am I somebody? Do I deserve this high five? Should I high five myself? What does that mean if I do high five myself, right? I have no other person to play with.
Can you high five yourself?
Right.
Yeah.
I think you can.
Have you played solo?
Or is it just a clap? Is that is that all it is, really?
Yeah.
A high clap.
I suppose if you do it above your head, then yeah.
So I'm just moving away from the jokes. I think you could just, if you really want to, you could high five yourself.
Even if you can't high five yourself, then as noted, it's a part of the effect you can't resolve, so you can still give yourself a tune counter.
Yeah. Fortunately, it's not a cost, so you don't have to do it to do the rest of the effect.
Do as much as you can.
The next two came from a friend. I don't think so. Is a John Hamm voice okay, or does it have to be a Spider Ham voice?
I think it says Spider-Ham, so it must be Spider-Ham voice.
Yeah, I think so.
But what is the best Spider-Ham voice? I mean,
There is that question as well.
It says your best Spider-Ham voice. So that's up to you, really. If you define it as the best Spider-Ham voice, I don't see why that's a problem.
if in your mind Spider-Ham sounds like John Hamm, then you're good. You just ham it up.
And then the last one is on cartoon physics. Does twerking count as wiggling?
Oh my god! I don't. The episodes had been age appropriate up until now, Scott. I don't know how to answer that, Scott. You've left me. Yeah. I mean, I guess no. I don't even want to attempt to answer.
just abstain.
But I'm interested to know and your thoughts on the matter, Scott. So please.
I think it would count as a wiggle.
It is not acceptable in my house. Rules.
Okay. Scott says it would count. Theorel doesn't allow it, and I am at a loss for words.
Do we want to do brief talk about the sinister motive stuff?
Oh, yeah, I think you said you wanted to clarify the requirement keyword.
So requirement parentheses resources. A card with the requirement keyword cannot be played unless each resource of the specified type is spent while paying for that card's cost.
If I remember rightly, I said that from the text that was in the article previewing that set, it looked as though it would work the same way as I can't remember the exact text, but cards like Crushing Blow, where you need to pay with a certain resource type. And now that we have the Sinister Motives rulebook, the way requirement is defined is different. For example, cost reductions will only work if the printed cost of the card is higher than the requirements, because you always have to pay whatever the requirements are. So even if you manage to reduce something down to 0 and it's got a requirement of a physical resource, you have to pay a physical resource.
Yep, and we do have confirmation on, I believe what you were talking about, Scott, that if you do reduce the cost of, let's go with the best example here, the Spider-Man Basic Ally, which has a requirement of energy, physical, mental. He reduces cost with, say, Helicarrier. You still have to pay all 3 resources to play it. But there are ways you could cheat around that, right?
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning that any put into play effect, such as make the call, that will bypass the requirement. And yeah, make the call is a particularly good example because you are paying for the ally, but it's not paying the cost to play the card. It's
putting it into play, which bypasses restrictions and such of playing.
Yeah, it's the restriction that's in the requirement definition. A card with requirement keyword cannot be played unless, because you're not playing it, then you don't have to meet that restriction.
Yep. And the other card that's going to help you do that is Across the Spider-Verse. The max 1 of event. So yeah, Across the Spider-Verse, the max 1 of event. It's only one of them, but that's still pretty powerful if you can get out the Spider-Man Basic Ally, because he's a really strong ally. And bypassing that cost is nice. It's really nice.
Yes. Also in the Sinister Motives rulebook is a new definition for team up. They have changed it to accommodate the team up for Gwen and Miles that require them to be in alter ego form rather than hero form. Yeah, all the previous ones were hero names, and I won't read the whole thing because it's mostly identical apart from the bit in brackets in the very last sentence where previously it said hero or ally. The new version says identity or ally. And yeah, this has some implications that haven't yet been confirmed, but I think are probably pretty solid. I think firstly, you can assume that this new definition of team up supersedes the one that is in the version 1.4 rulebook, and I expect when we get a new RRG, it will be updated to say identity rather than hero. And it also confirms what I said on whichever episode it was in the past. The team ups for Rocket and Groot. The person that plays the card needs to be in hero form because it's a hero action, but the other person can be in alter ego form because they have the same name on both their hero and alter ego sides, and it just specifies the name. It doesn't specify which form they're in.
Yep, you were right, Scott.
Thank you.
That also applies to Gamora and Nebula. Their team up card.
And that's a good thing that they amended that there, so that we know how it works for sure. And the how was it?
Young Love.
Yeah, Young Love event just solidifies that change there because it names both the alter egos of Gwen and Miles. Anything else? I had a couple of things I wanted to mention quickly. See, a couple of things that I did want to mention for the Spider-Ham pack is the Justice Spider-Man that comes with him. It's a new Web Warrior ally, Spider-Man Paviter, I believe is his name. Has an ability that reads response after Spider-Man enters play, remove 1 threat from a scheme for each Web Warrior card you control, and then in italics, including Spider-Man. This should be referring to itself. So he's not referring to any other Spider-Man but Pavatar himself. So that effect is only going to... just doesn't... It's self-referential and doesn't reference any other Spider-Man. I know there's been questions about that. And I think that's really the only card. I think that's it in terms of the pack. I don't know if there's anything else we need to mention. So we could probably close it out there. Thanks for joining, guys. That's our thoughts on the Spider-Ham pack. Hopefully you don't have anything against cartoons and you pick it up and ham it up. Thanks for joining me, Scott. Thanks for joining me, Theorel.
Yes.
Good one.
Puerco? What are you? Some kind of silly cartoon?
You got a problem with cartoons?